Vincent van Gogh, the artist who painted through madness. In May 1889, Vincent van Gogh voluntarily admitted himself to the Saint Paul de Mausole Asylum in Saint-Rémy-de-Provence. His condition had worsened, and his brother Theo, ever his supporter, sought a place where Vincent could receive care and perhaps find solace. Originally, Vincent was supposed to go to a much larger public asylum in Marseille, a chaotic institution housing over 1,000 patients. Had that happened, the world might never have seen some of the most remarkable paintings in art history. Instead, Saint Paul de Mausole turned out to be an unexpected refuge. A small monastery-turned-asylum with only 41 patients, it offered something Vincent desperately needed: structure, tranquility, and the freedom to paint. Unlike in larger asylums, where patients were often treated with neglect or cruelty, Vincent was met with kindness and understanding. The doctors quickly realized that his only real chance at survival was through his art. If he stopped painting, he would crumble. The nights at the asylum were often filled with the screams and wails of other patients, but Vincent channeled his energy into his work. While others succumbed to the depths of their suffering, he created. Each day, he would wake up early, set up his easel, and work tirelessly. His brushstrokes moved with urgency, capturing vibrant fields, swirling skies, and golden landscapes that seemed to defy the grim reality of his surroundings. Despite his mental torment, his art remained full of life and color. The birth of The Starry Night. On June 18, 1889, Van Gogh painted what would become one of the most famous artworks in history, The Starry Night. He had painted the view from his window dozens of times, but this time, it was different. A dreamlike, swirling sky, an ethereal moon, and celestial bodies that pulsed with an almost supernatural energy. Unlike his usual works, this one was painted entirely from memory, during the day, in his ground-floor studio. Illustration: Van Gogh standing by the barred window of his cell, looking out at the rolling hills and vast sky, his hands clutching a sketchbook as he envisions the swirls of the starry night. Vincent was often romanticized as a mad genius, a tortured artist lost in insanity, but the reality was far more complex. While he did experience manic episodes and hallucinations, most of the time, he was lucid, intelligent, well-read, and deeply philosophical. He was fluent in 4 languages, wrote extensively to his friends and family, and had an intricate understanding of artistic movements and techniques. He was not merely a victim of madness, but rather a man struggling to find his place in the world. His mental struggles intensified after his time in Alge, particularly following his infamous conflict with Paul Gauguin. The emotional turmoil led to a severe psychotic episode, during which he cut off his own ear. Soon after, he began suffering from severe seizures, hallucinations, and depressive episodes. The doctors at Saint-Rémy diagnosed him with epilepsy, though modern psychiatrists believe he may have had bipolar disorder and syphilis. Despite everything, painting remained his lifeline. He called his fellow patients companions in misfortune. Yet many historians now believe that he was, ironically, the sanest man in the entire asylum. Life in isolation, a mixed blessing. For over a year, Vincent lived at Saint-Rémy, and during that time, he was more productive than ever. He completed at least 150 paintings, an astonishing feat, averaging 1 painting every other day. He was allowed access to a dedicated studio, thanks to Theo's insistence that he be permitted to paint. Despite his suffering, his work did not descend into darkness. Many of his asylum paintings, such as Wheat Field with Cypresses and Irises, are full of light and vibrant color. His work was not a product of his illness but rather his way of resisting it. He once wrote, "Art is to console those who are broken by life." Though the asylum was restrictive, it was not the nightmare one might expect from 19th-century institutions. The founder of Saint-Rémy was progressive for his time. He believed that nature, art, And music had a healing effect on the mind. He had planted lush gardens, where Vincent often sat for hours, sketching and absorbing the peace. Illustration: Van Gogh sitting in the garden. Surrounded by irises and olive trees, his easel set up before him, his brush moving feverishly over the canvas. His health improved in some ways. At the asylum, there was no absinthe. No toxic romances, no urban chaos. He ate 3 meals a day and had a structured routine. Visitors remarked on how healthy he looked when he left to visit Theo and his wife Jo in Paris. For a brief moment, it seemed as if he might recover. But recovery was fragile. Each time he had a manic episode, he was forbidden from painting, a punishment worse than any illness. These forced periods of idleness were torture for him. He wrote to Theo, "When I cannot paint, I feel as if I am suffocating." The final chapter. By May 1890, Vincent was released from Saint-Rémy and moved to Auvers-sur-Oise, a small town near Paris. He was under the care of Dr. Paul Gogh, a physician who also had an interest in art and psychology. In Auvers, he painted almost obsessively, completing over 70 works in just 2 months. But beneath the feverish creativity, his depression deepened. On July 27, 1890, Vincent shot himself in the chest. He survived for 36 agonizing hours, during which Theo rushed to his bedside. His final words to his brother were, "The sadness will last forever." A legacy beyond madness, the artist the world almost missed. It is often said that Vincent van Gogh died in complete obscurity, a neglected genius. His brilliance lost to the world until decades after his death. But the truth is more complex. By the time he took his own life in 1890, the tides had already begun to shift. His work was no longer dismissed outright, and his name was being whispered in the right artistic circles. In January 1890, just months before his tragic end, one of his paintings, The Red Vineyard, had sold for 400 francs in Brussels, a respectable sum for a rising artist. His work was shown at exhibitions alongside those of Renoir, Cézanne, and Toulouse-Lautrec, the very artists who would shape modern art. A well-regarded critic had published an article recognizing Vincent's unique vision, describing his brushwork as something new. Something unlike anything else. In March of that same year, 10 of his paintings were displayed in a major Parisian exhibition, attended by the President of France himself. It was a moment that could have changed everything. For years, Vincent had written to Theo about his dream, not just to paint, but to be recognized as a true artist, not as a madman. He was on the verge of realizing that dream. Had he held on a little longer, had he endured just a few more months, he might have seen his name rise alongside those of the Impressionists he admired. The tragedy of his story is not just that he died, but that he died believing he had failed. An enduring mystery, the meaning of the Starry Night. Today, The Starry Night is one of the most celebrated and analyzed paintings in history. It hangs in the Museum of Modern Art in New York, where millions visit it each year, captivated by its swirling skies, its electrified stars, and the deep sense of movement that seems to pulse across the canvas. But what did Vincent mean by it? Was it a faithful recreation of the night sky? A vision of heaven? A dreamscape, shaped by madness? Art historians have debated its meaning for over a century. Some believe it represents his longing for escape, an idealized version of the world outside his asylum window. Others think it is a spiritual painting, reflecting his evolving beliefs about nature and the universe. There is even a theory that the Starry Night wasn't about the sky at all, but about Vincent himself, a man who felt trapped on Earth but yearned for something greater, something beyond. In one of his letters to Theo, Vincent wrote, "Just as we take the train to get to Tarascon or Rouen, we take death to reach a star." Some see this as proof that the Starry Night was his farewell. A painting that symbolized his final journey. Painting in defiance of madness. For too long, Vincent's work has been romanticized as the product of madness. As if his suffering was necessary for his genius. But this is a dangerous myth. He did not paint because of his suffering, he painted in spite of it. His art was not a symptom of illness, but rather a weapon against it. Every time he picked up a brush, he was fighting back against despair, against the darkness that threatened to consume him. His colors were not the colors of madness, but of resilience, hope, and an unbreakable will to create. Even in the asylum, even when he was at his lowest, he never stopped painting. And that is perhaps the greatest lesson Vincent van Gogh left behind, not just that beauty can emerge from pain, but that art can be an act of survival.